panel is going to focus on is some questions around the trend we've seen over the last, in my career, I guess it's probably the last 10 to 15 years, where we've seen a lot of the finance jobs get outsourced to countries like India and parts of Eastern Europe. And we're interested to explore really now the opportunities that automation offers to maybe bring some of those jobs back to Western Europe, or maybe that the opposite will happen and they'll continue to thrive in those countries. So I wanted to open up this up to the panel. I'll try not to it's just too much in a line. So maybe, Inka, maybe I can start with you at the far end. You're obviously involved with many startups, and you see, typically in this region of the world, you're seeing startups. Are you seeing any trends that support this, where startups are trying to bring automation that will improve productivity for us here in Western Europe?
Absolutely. I think if you look at the fintech area altogether, majority of the companies or the innovative startups actually operate in an area where there is some sort of a new kind of let's say, connectivity or new kind of automation or new kind of customer service experience. So I would maybe put them into a three buckets. The startups which actually help big existing institutions and banks and financial players to automate their own operations, whether it's in customer service, like chatbots or natural language processing-based technologies, to really understand the user and the customer, what they need. Then also solutions where they automate, for example, credit ratings or loan decisions or things like this. And then, of course, companies which really go deep to the security systems and so forth of the bigger institutions. Then there are the startups which actually bypass the traditional players, and they go around. So they build their own consumer service, typically with a spearhead service, just to kind of challenge the bigger players. I think many of the companies eventually aim to either grow to become truly bigger ones or being acquired by any of the existing players. And then, of course, the big question are basically the companies operating on blockchain technologies, and these ladies are much more experts to talk about that. But they truly kind of challenge the way the business is being run and how the business models operate. So long answer to your question, but yes, there are a lot of companies around there, and most of them are bringing automation in a sense which, in my opinion, kind of just takes that manual part of the work away, which still today requires a lot of labor-intensive paperwork or paper handling or basically filling in blankets and so forth. All of that is going to disappear. So I think there's going to be a lot of job loss in that kind of manual part in maybe India or some other parts of the world. But the new value, of course, is created areas where we as humans work alongside with technology. Technology is not going to take over everything. We're going to work together with technology.
And maybe I can open this up a little bit. So, Daria, what's your feeling about how maybe members of the audience should be embracing this new world and how they can interact with it to maybe further their own expertise or productivity in the workplace over here?
Okay, so it depends what kind of audience is here. If there are startups or investors, as I can see smiles here, both here. So really, I mean, approaching new trends is always good to observe. And I suppose that a lot of us are learning while exploring use cases from startups, because startups quite often are showing us what works, what not. How sad it is, but it's true. So that's what I'm doing actually, and exploring a lot of use cases that these startups are addressing. And another thing is like what I saw as a trend, if we're talking, for example, people are working in the financial departments in companies, then there is a very interesting trend that there are more and more programs or internal approaches to help those people to have entrepreneurial skill sets, like to think a bit different, to use new methods, to address problems or gaps, existing gaps within the industry. And I'm talking behind of like corporates like IKEA or Leroy Merlin, which are applying such kind of things, and they encouraging employees from financial departments particularly to actually to think about innovation inside.
Okay, and Bianca, I mean, you presented this morning on identity, and it was very much, asking the audience to think about taking responsibility for their own identity. This is kind of continuing on that theme where we're sort of saying to the audience, how can they take responsibility for leveraging these new opportunities that technology might bring? How might they go about that sort of activity?
I think I've seen some banks and some companies, and I used to run a company with 168 people, and one of the things that we did is we actually had an exercise of like work yourself out of a job. Like, what are the technology tools that you can be using that actually make your job useless? How far can a job go to useless or to completely being able to outsource? So I think that the culture shift in how you even define the use or the outsourcing bad word, and it has some sort of a bad feel. I think that shift in paradigm internally is super important, as well as thinking and realizing that we're moving towards a gig economy, right? We're moving towards people being needed in a different part of the process, not perhaps through the entire process. So I think how is your organization structured to look at whether technology is a filling in the gap or it's a human being that maybe is just specialized in a particular thing. So I think that those are things that I've seen done properly and actually quite effective.
I think that was a super interesting point, and one thing which every CFO, because I think there are a lot of CFOs in the room, should be asking in a way is that if you look at, for example, media industry, 70% of the old kind of media industry is already gone, and that basically will happen to the financial industry as well. So what am I going to do when 70% of my kind of a baseline business is going to transform and going to be completely different? I think that's kind of a bit of a similar question, like outside in question when you were posing the inside out question. Then the second question is like, as a CFOs, at least what I've learned from the CFOs, there are lots of different kinds of CFOs, but often the question always on the decisions on digitalization is like, what is the payback time? And it's easier to predict on areas which you know and you have organizational competencies in. But in terms of digital and the future, nobody does. So you're going to basically have to invest in building those competencies and skills into your organization. So there's this period of time that you're actually not going to know the unknown. So you're going to have to take that leap. And that's going to be quite difficult, particularly for, let's say, traditional companies.
Well, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think the finance department, and trying not to alienate the entire room as I say this, but is not probably known for its early adoption of new technology, and many of the companies in the room will still be using technology that was probably originated in the 60s and 70s, products like SAP and Oracle, which still dominate this financial landscape that we're working. So what do you think, and maybe Daria, I could ask you, what do you think will kind of force the pace in the finance world? Will it be the technology companies themselves, or will it be the competition, or maybe other pressures, cost pressures? What do you think will drive this change that I agree is inevitably coming?
I doubt that technology, like the first thing which will actually force us to change behavior. That's usually happening when you see that some kind of typical workflow could be changed for technology. That's the first thing, and that's usually what's happening. But the second most important is like if you want to survive or you want to keep your business on top of this. So it's rather not like as, for example, like just digitalize it, but rather understand what exactly you want to digitalize or tokenize or whatever you want to do with it and how you wanted to do it. And the best option from here is exploring. That's what I usually say, that startups are exploring a lot. So that's why some of them really able to survive, basically. So that's the most important thing. Like that's maybe here it's very important also to see like if technology forces us to change our behavior, then what will be our, how to say, reply on this or our next step on this? And if it will be panic or if it will be a new type of behavior when we not only adapt, but rather invent something by ourselves, like a new skill set in ourselves, for example.
I think the interesting thing to add to this, or just to think about it differently, is that a lot of the times, like the finance departments or compliance departments are now under such massive pressures, right? So I find it quite easily sometimes as a startup to criticize and say they don't innovate. So I think the whole, I hate to say it, but like the whole failing faster or decompartmentalizing the actions or the responsibilities that you have and understanding how do you turn that cost or that obligation into a potential revenue center or into a small enough bit and piece that you can say, okay, I'm going to test trial this type of software. I'm going to automate this and see how it happens. And then I can have, because if you're a CFO, you're likely pretty analytical, and then I have a little bit of data to feel comfortable about what else can I do with this technology. So I think that that's the historical shift of buying a massive technology stack, like you said, like an SAP or an Oracle. You look at most companies, they actually don't use even 60% of the whole capacity of the software. I think that room is no longer available. So maybe you're going to have highly specialized, and APIs are enabling that to happen.
And for example, just as I said, like talking always about startups, like looking at the developing countries, like when mobile phones became de facto the banks, like for unbanked people, for those who didn't have that before. And what are usually startups are doing, like Fintech startups are doing, they are massively investing in financial education, like explaining people the way how this technology works and how they can actually get benefits out of this. So this is the way how they adapt to the new reality and to the way how to get new customers actually on board. So that's why most probably for big players, it's a right time understand that to change behavior, it's necessary for them to get new customers on board as well.
I fully agree. I don't think the driver is the technology. Technology is the enabler. Competition is the thing that pushes a little bit, but consumer behavior change is the one which really forces companies to move and change. And then there will be the ones who kind of are a bit latecomers, and then the ones who kind of realize it a bit faster. The other thing is, like, I think we're now facing a time when the industry barriers are blurring. So are you a car dealer or a financial institution? You know, so I think that actually means that competition, the true competition, might eventually come from a completely different direction, which is from these data giants, the companies who are now creating these massive data assets in terms of consumer data, the consumer behavior, whether that's been Facebook or Google or Alibaba or Tencent. My point being is that all of these companies have a capability to serve consumers in the financial area as well.
So I think a shift from that, a shift from that would be maybe perhaps we were talking about this earlier, is a lot of people are talking about utilizing data or having AI models and insurance as an example. And they're saying, with that, I'm going to have better cost of capital and deployment of product and better price optimization, which is on the CFO helm. The interesting part is that now the power shift is actually an opportunity for you of saying, how's the organization? Maybe I find out that I can give better, cheaper insurance to me than I'm going to give to Jeff. How is your organization even structured from a sales and marketing and deployment and operations perspective to actually implement that price change that you found out by automating something? So there's a massive shift that is not only just the insight or the technology driven, it's actually how the organization functions and deploys that to the market.
I mean, it's interesting, in the finance world specifically, I mean, we've talked about startups and the sort of disruptive technology that comes along, but many of the startups, and some of us here present today, are really plugging the gaps in the old ERP systems. So they are, they've built entire businesses around things that, that SAP or Oracle or some of the other traditional products are unable to do. But we haven't yet seen a full disruptor. I mean, there are products like NetSuite coming along, but they quickly got bought by Oracle, so who knows where that'll go. But do you see anything as sort of big shift coming in the finance world that this audience should be kind of thinking about, or are you seeing in the startups that you get involved with kind of smaller and more niche type? Are the startups really just trying to still pick at the niche areas?
Well, I think it would be a bit generalization to say that startups are filling small gaps. There are, of course, companies that do so-called incremental innovation, and then there are companies who are really trying to disrupt business model, and it might be that you don't see them just yet, because they might be growing their baseline of customership maybe in the bigger markets, like in China or like in US. So I think in terms of a business model change, it would mean that actually you don't, for example, pay anything for your insurance, but you, for example, somehow as a consumer, the insurance provider monetizes your profile. That could be an example. Or the time when you actually can start talking to Alexa as a conversational UI about your bank accounts or your money transfers or anything relating to your financial asset management. So I think these basically conversational UI elements coming to play are great examples. Many of the startups are, in my opinion, kind of building their first asset to do the next big thing. I don't know, how do you see that? But
well, you can jump in, but I think that to me the biggest change, going back to your question in terms of what do I see really changing on how you're going to sit in the future and evaluate, I think you're going to start to see people evaluate way less vendors. I look at an average bank and they'll have 200 vendors to do 2 or 3 things. So I think you're going to start to have sort of a centralization, which is an opportunity for outsourcing perhaps some of that cost center, or also an opportunity for some monopoly concerns. You look at between the big fours like Apple, Google, Amazon, and Facebook, they're larger than some of the whole economies of the world. So I think that I see that as an opportunity for some of the startups to really change the way that economic structures are held, but also an opportunity for you, if you're looking at your company, to say, do I really need to do everything? I think you're starting to see SME outsource to things like Amazon. So I'll lead it back to you on one of the conversations we just had about the APIs and how there's a lot of turnkey solutions right now, which is historically what selling disks at old IBM days or SAP were what this was supposed to be about.
I would add here, definitely when the Big Four are actually providing opportunities for startups to develop new business, it's somehow great. We had a conversation regarding Amazon blockchain templates, which were launched 2 or 3 days ago, I think, a few days ago. So if we apply that kind of tool to financial industry or healthcare industry, it has amazing impact in terms of standardizations and really simple solution, what you can use, just plug and play, very simply. So why not, and most probably startups will use this opportunity. Another option which I would like to show or dimension, it not only about the Big Four, but also about somewhere there is nothing existing, like in developing countries, there is nothing. Why, for example, blockchain is really massively growing in South Africa or some other locations, because people don't have anything there, technology adoption, so they adopt something new one. And those startups which could find this way and create a new customer behavior or customer experience, then they will get this market, and most probably slowly they will become a standard, for example, mobile money became in Africa so far.
I mean, that's a very interesting point and a challenge for us here in sort of, what we call the more developed world, because as we saw the Eastern European countries develop, their mobile phone systems are now considerably more sophisticated than you'd see in the UK. I'm always constantly disappointed with my signal dropping out when I'm home, but when I seem to be traveling, I don't seem to have any problems at all. So is that going to present us a challenge in the developed world that we're kind of stuck with some legacy that we will find very difficult to get away from?
I think that's undeniable. I think that you have large data sets and you have compliance teams that can't get rid of it. You can't get rid of your mainframe or your infrastructure. I think that the conversation is going to be about how you redefine your creation of value. A lot of the times you think you have to be who's going to be the platform of them all, but It's actually how are you going to use that relationship of trust or that relationship that you think you have with your client and maybe understand that you're not going to hold everything. And I think that some of the derivatives like PSD2 are enabling that to happen and saying, okay, you're going to give consent, but maybe somebody else is going to provide that service.
I would add here is like definitely what is happening now here in developed countries. It's a matter of discussion or something which make us to discuss questions which we didn't discuss before, like you're at the operational table, doctor is planning to make you an operation, and what kind of data you will provide him, all what he needs, or something which is applied to GDPR. You know, before some time we would not even consider such kind of question, like this would be even a question for us. Now there is a sense to discuss.
So I'm a big believer that in terms of a developed world, we're so well equipped. So our capability to use new services as consumers and you know, just start using different technologies is so high that in a way I would actually say that the competitive market, if you look at, for example, Chinese market, where it's extremely fast and people change very quickly, that's going to come to the Europe as well. Developing countries, they will frog leap. And that will, of course, create a new kind of a competition. So there are different drivers in different markets.
Okay, great. And I think that was a positive note to finish on, that we're optimistic for the future for the developed economies. So can I thank my panelists? That was a very interesting conversation, and I look forward to hearing your presentations later in the event. Thank you.